Story 1. Marianne Polly Nichols, The First Echo. The terror began on August 31st with a 43-year-old woman everyone called Polly. Marianne Nichols was born in London in 1845 to a locksmith and his wife. In 1864, she married a printer's machinist named William Nichols, and together they had 5 children. For a time, they seemed to have a stable working-class life. But the marriage eventually fell apart, strained by Polly's growing struggles with alcohol. The final break happened around 1880. Her father claimed William had an affair, while William insisted Polly had left him. Whatever the precise cause, the result was the same. Polly was on her own. For the next 8 years, she drifted. She moved between the dreaded workhouses, institutions where the poor were given food and shelter in exchange for hard labor, and short-lived jobs in domestic service. She was briefly employed by a family of teetotalers, but as an alcoholic, she found the position untenable and left after just a few months. Stability was impossible. Her reliance on alcohol was a constant battle, a vicious cycle that pushed her further into the poverty that likely drove her to drink in the first place. Despite her immense hardships, those who knew her remembered Polly as a cheerful and kind woman. On the night of August 30th, 1888, she was seen in a pub on Brick Lane. She reportedly told her friend Emily Holland that she had earned the money for her lodging 3 times over that day, but had drunk it all away. She was turned away from her lodging house at 18 Thrall Street for not having the required 4pence. Around 2:30 a.m., just an hour before her death, Emily saw her walking alone, intoxicated but in good spirits, vowing to find the money somehow. She then disappeared into the darkness. A little over an hour later, at 3:40 a.m. on August 31st, a cart driver named Charles Cross was walking down Bucks Row, a dark and quiet street, when he saw what he thought was a drunken woman lying on the ground. He called over another man, Robert Paul, and together they approached the body. They noticed her throat had been deeply cut. The press exploded with the gruesome details. Marianne Nichols was no longer just Polly. She was the first canonical victim of a killer who now had the city of London gripped by a fear that was only just beginning. Story 2. Annie Chapman, The Panic Deepens. Just 8 days later, on September 8th, the killer struck again, and with even greater ferocity. The victim was Annie Chapman, a 47-year-old whose life had also been marked by a slow, tragic decline. Born Eliza Ann Smith, she came from a more respectable background than Polly. Her father was a soldier in the Life Guards. In 1869, she married a gentleman's coachman, John Chapman, and they lived for a time in Windsor, where they had 3 children. But their life together was shattered by grief. Their eldest daughter, Emily, died of meningitis at age 12, and their youngest son was born with a permanent disability. Both Annie and her husband fell into heavy drinking to cope with their sorrow. The marriage crumbled under the weight of alcoholism, and they separated in 1884. John, legally required to support her, sent her a weekly allowance of 10 shillings, which allowed her to live modestly. But when he died of cirrhosis of the liver in 1886, that lifeline was severed. Alone and without a steady income, Annie's life spiraled further. She moved to Whitechapel, where she survived on the small sums she could make from crochet work, selling flowers, and, when necessary, prostitution. A friend later said that after her husband's death, she seemed to have given way altogether. In the days just before her death, she had been involved in a fight with another woman at her lodging house, apparently over a shared bar of soap or a rivalry for the affections of a local man known as the pensioner. The fight left her with a bruised eye and chest. On the morning of September 8th, she was feeling unwell and was short on her lodging money. The lodging housekeeper sent her out to try and earn it. She left the Doss house on Dorset Street, telling the keeper she'd be back soon. Around 6 a.m., her horribly mutilated body was found in the backyard of 29 Hanbury Street by a resident. The killer's brutality had escalated dramatically. Not only was her throat cut with vicious precision, but her abdomen had been laid open. Her intestines were pulled out and draped over her shoulder, and her uterus had been surgically removed and taken from the scene. The murder of Annie Chapman created a full-blown panic in the East End. The press, now realizing this was the work of a serial killer, began to refer to him as a monster, giving him the moniker Leather Apron, before a famous letter would give him the name that would stick. The police were under immense pressure to catch him. Story 3. Elizabeth Stride. The Interruption. The end of September brought a new level of audacity from the killer, a night that would become infamous as the double event. In the space of less than an hour, in the early hours of September 30th, he would attack 2 women. The first victim was Elizabeth Stride. Born Elizabeth Gustafsdotter in Sweden in 1843, the 44-year-old, known to some as Long Liz, had a life defined by hardship. After working as a domestic servant and being registered for prostitution in her home country, she moved to London in 1866. She married a ship's carpenter, John Stride, and for a time they ran a coffee shop. After the marriage fell apart, Elizabeth's life became a familiar pattern of poverty, lodging houses, and struggles with alcoholism. She had an on-again, off-again relationship with a dock worker named Michael Kidney. But it was tumultuous, and she often left him to live in the lodging houses on Flower and Dean Street. Around 1 a.m. on September 30th, a man named Louis Diemschutz steered his pony and cart into Dutfield's yard, a dark passage off Berner Street. His pony suddenly shied away. On the ground lay the body of Elizabeth Stride. Her throat had been cut, but unlike the other victims, there were no other mutilations. Blood was reportedly still flowing from the wound, suggesting to the doctor on scene that she had been killed just moments before Diemschutz's arrival. The prevailing theory among investigators was that the killer had been interrupted before he could carry out his gruesome ritual. It's a theory still debated today, with some researchers questioning if Stride was a Ripper victim at all, or the victim of a different attacker. But that theory gained terrifying weight less than an hour later, when the killer, perhaps angered at being disturbed, struck again with renewed ferocity. Story 4. Catherine Eddowes. The double event's climax. Just 45 minutes after Elizabeth Stride's body was discovered, the killer's rage was unleashed again, this time crossing from the jurisdiction of the Metropolitan Police into the territory of the City of London Police. The victim was 46-year-old Catherine Eddowes. Born in Wolverhampton, she spent many years with a common-law husband, Thomas Conway, a former soldier with whom she had 3 children. They made a living selling cheap books and gallows ballads, popular songs about recent crimes, on the streets. A tattoo of his initials TC remained on her forearm. After they separated in 1881, her life, like the others, spiraled. She ended up in Whitechapel, living with a new partner, John Kelly. On the evening of her murder, Catherine had been arrested for public drunkenness after being found lying on the pavement on Aldgate High Street. She was held in a cell at Bishopsgate Police Station to sober up. When she was finally deemed fit for release at 1 a.m., the exact time Elizabeth Stride's body was being discovered a short distance away, the desk sergeant told her she could go. Her last known words were a cheerful, "All right, good night, old cock." At 1:45 a.m., a constable, P.C. Edward Watkins, walked his beat through Mitre Square, a small, dark square within the city of London. He found her body in a dark corner. The attack was frenzied and savage. Her throat was cut, her face severely mutilated, and her abdomen was ripped open. Her left kidney and part of her uterus had been removed and taken by the killer. The double event showcased a killer who was growing bolder and more confident, taunting the police by operating across 2 different jurisdictions and cementing his terrifying legend in the city's psyche. It was after this night that the police released a letter that had been sent to a news agency, signed with a new, horrifying name: Jack the Ripper. Story 5. Mary Jane Kelly, The Final Horror. The final canonical act of the Autumn of Terror was by far the most horrific. The victim was Mary Jane Kelly, the youngest of the 5, only about 25 years old. Her early life is shrouded in mystery, based largely on stories she told others. She was believed to have been born in Ireland and moved to Wales as a child. It's thought she was widowed when her husband, a coal miner, was killed in an accident, after which she moved to London. Some accounts even suggest a period spent living a more high-class life in France. Unlike the other 4 women who were killed in semi-public streets and alleyways, Mary Jane was murdered in the relative privacy of her small ground-floor room at 13 Miller's Court. This critical difference gave her killer an unprecedented and terrifying amount of time. On the morning of November 9th, 1888, her landlord, John McCarthy, sent his assistant, Thomas Bowyer, to collect 6 weeks of overdue rent. Bowyer knocked on the door but received no response. The door was locked. He moved to the side of the room, pushed aside a coat stuffed into a broken window pane, and peered inside. What he saw was a scene of almost unimaginable horror. Mary Jane Kelly's body had been mutilated beyond all recognition. The attack had been so savage that the initial cause of death was determined to be the severing of her carotid artery. But the mutilations that followed were apocalyptic. Her organs had been removed and placed around the room, on the bedside table, and beneath her head. Her face was hacked away and her heart had been removed and was missing from the crime scene. The sheer, unmitigated savagery of the crime shocked even the most hardened police officers and reporters who were eventually allowed onto the scene. It is often reported that her former partner, Joseph Barnett, who had left her just days earlier, could only identify her remains by her eyes and ears. This final gruesome murder was the climax of the Ripper's reign of terror. For reasons we will likely never know, it was apparently his last. The Autumn of Terror ended as abruptly and mysteriously as it began. The man the world now knew as Jack the Ripper was never caught, his identity lost to time, becoming one of history's greatest and most obsessed over unsolved mysteries. But while generations of writers, filmmakers, and amateur detectives have obsessed over the killer's identity, the true tragedy of these crimes has often been forgotten. Marianne, Annie, Elizabeth, Catherine, and Mary Jane were not just abstract victims or names on a list. They were women trapped by the brutal poverty and social indifference of their time. fighting for their survival every single day in a world that offered them little hope and even less protection. Their lives were hard, filled with loss and pain, but they were their own. They had friends who cared for them, children they had loved, and moments of laughter and kindness amidst the sorrow. It is their stories, not the ever-deepening shadow of their killer, that truly deserve to be remembered. Beyond the legend, beyond the myth, beyond the gory nickname, there are 5 real women whose lives, however brief and tragic, mattered. The stories of these women, their struggles, their resilience, and their humanity have been overshadowed for far too long. If you believe it's important to remember their lives, not just the gruesome details of their deaths, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps ensure these vital stories continue to be told.